think I need to start here today with this Johnson & Johnson story. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is asking for a pause in the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Now, I need to put this in perspective for you. Why? 6 people who got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine had very rare and dangerous blood clots form. Now, here's the thing that happened. These blood clots, if you've had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, don't worry about it because the blood clots formed almost immediately after taking the vaccine. Now, I've had a friend who told me he administered doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and from one vial, every single person who got the injection seized up on him, and it was from one vial. They concluded something was wrong with the vial. They have since stopped producing from that particular plant the vaccine. But here's what you need to know. With AstraZeneca also has a blood clotting issue. 29 of the 31 cases in Europe were women. But here's the other data point. Let me read you first the FDA tweet so that you understand what's going on here. As of April 12th, 6.8 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine have been administered in the United States. The CDC and FDA are reviewing data involving 6 reported U.S. cases of a rare and severe type of blood clot in individuals who received the vaccine. Right now, these adverse events appear to be extremely rare. Treatment of this specific type of blood clot is different from the treatment that might typically be administered. The CDC will convene a meeting of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice on Wednesday to further review these cases and assess their potential significance. FDA will review the analysis as it investigates these cases. Until that process is complete, we recommend a pause on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This is important to ensure that the healthcare provider community is aware of the potential for these adverse events and can plan due to the unique treatment required with this type of blood clot. Let me read you the data again. There are more than 6.8 million doses administered and 6 total blood clots. 1 per million, basically. Actually, slightly less than 1 per million. There are a lot of people out there who are convinced that the reason for these mixed messages from the government on going back to your daily life after you get the vaccine, we know, for example, in the real world, not the lab, but in the real world, no one has gotten hospitalized or dead from COVID after getting the vaccine. There have been people who have gotten COVID after getting the vaccine. None of those people were hospitalized because of COVID. Some of those people were hospitalized, but not because of COVID. One person died, but not because of COVID. They had advanced terminal cancer and died of the cancer, not the COVID. But there's a lot of misinformation out there, and the government is not helping. The government is telling everyone, go get your vaccine, and now the government is saying, after close to 7 million doses of one of these vaccines, 6 people got a rare blood clot, therefore we need to stop that one vaccine. Again, it's important to remember, if you've had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, you don't need to worry because the clots form fairly quickly after administration of the vaccine. The Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines may make you feel a little bad, but they're not actually listen, I had the Moderna one, and for 24 hours I felt like crap. My wife, who has lung cancer and is on treatment for her lung cancer, was wiped out for about a week and a half from the second dose of the Moderna vaccine. Her the first dose, she had a sore arm. Second dose, she was wiped out. But her doctor actually said, believe it or not, this is kind of the bizarre thing. I mean, she So my wife, she got it from one of the local pharmacies here and volunteered to every day. They would send her a text and ask her how she was doing. The first day, I believe it was, she replied with an expletive. The second day, you're trying to kill me. And the third day, I'm not dead yet. The fourth day, I'm feeling a little better. And on it went for more than a week of her testy responses. She resented like hell having taken the vaccine. I mean, she was wiped out. Now, again, my wife has lung cancer. She and Rush Limbaugh have very much the same type. It's a genetic form of lung cancer. And she's on a treatment, and she's actually doing very good. She takes a pill every day, and they caught it very early. Her cancer was caught very early. And it's genetic. Her body produces a protein that creates these tumors. And she takes a pill every day that keeps the protein from growing. Therefore, the tumors can't grow. They're kind of in stasis, some of them collapsing within her lungs. She can't get rid of it. It's genetic, but they have, for now, this pill works. So her immune system is compromised to a degree anyway. Her doctor was actually ecstatic that she reacted so badly to the vaccine because he said it means that her immune system is producing a robust response, and that's really good. The fact that she had a reaction that bad means that her immune system is still able to whip into high gear and produce a response. He was very encouraged. She was ready to go kill the people at Moderna for having produced the vaccine, but now she's happy. We've actually been to restaurants, and that's the thing here. Is that the message should be based on the real world data, particularly from the Pfizer and Moderna one, but also the Johnson & Johnson one. The real world data should be, go live your life. You get the vaccine, go back to normal. You may get COVID, but it's going to be a very minor case. Even my wife's oncologist, who told her she had up to a 50% chance of mortality, guaranteed 25% increase in mortality risk if she got COVID, most likely a 50-50 chance of dying if she got COVID. Now says that if she gets COVID, based on their data, she's going to be fine. I mean, just think about that. Think about what we're dealing with. My wife, with a form of lung cancer, had an extremely elevated risk of mortality if she got COVID. My wife has been home since February of last year. She has barely left the house. I have, since February of last year, done all the grocery shopping, pick up food in the evening for her. She doesn't go out. If we've gone out, she sat outside, and there aren't a lot of options for us around here this time of year because where I live, the pollen is so terrible right now. Everything is yellow. Everything is yellow. And so it's hard to go out. And my wife, so when Christy got cancer, she pulled the I've Got Cancer card and made me buy her a Harley. And she and her group of motorcycle friends from the Harley owners group, they like to go off into the countryside and find a little meat and three and have lunch. She hasn't done it for a year. She's not been on her motorcycle in more than a year, it seems like. And she finally got together with them this past week. And they went to some hole-in-the-wall restaurant for a catfish fry. And it was her first time out of the house. Her mood changed so dramatically. Just being able to be out of the house, being able to be on her motorcycle, be back with her friends. Life got back to normal for her. She wore a mask when she went in. She took it off when she sat down to eat. She's still very cautious about that. We've now gone inside restaurants, but she's able to do that now because she's had the vaccine. And yet Dr. Fauci and the federal government are like, no, you can't do that. No, you got to wear your mask. You got to socially distance. You got to wash your hands. You got to stay away from people who aren't vaccinated. But the real world data suggests otherwise. The real world data suggests even if you get COVID, it's not going to be a bad case. And it's going to be a weakened case that even if you spread it to other people, they're not going to be. Well, and if you get everybody vaccinated as quickly as you can, you're going to be better off. But the message now is, well, don't use Johnson & Johnson. Out of almost 7 million people, 6 got a blood clot. We got to pause on this one. And if you take the others, you can't go back to normal. Now, there are a lot of people who say the reason the government is doing this is because the government wants to control us and not give up that control. I would submit to you the government already thinks they do control us. And the better answer here is not that the government wants to use this virus to control us, but that the government is risk averse at this point. Never confuse incompetence for malfeasance and malevolent nature. The government is incompetent when it comes to these things. The bureaucrats like Dr. Fauci, who is doing more harm than good. Dr. Fauci is a government bureaucrat. Dr. Fauci has a fiefdom. And Dr. Fauci, within his fiefdom, is the God of all that he creates. And what he says goes. And to some degree, Dr. Fauci, by letting go, is eroding the borders of his fiefdom and passing off the care of his people to other people. And the net result there is hyper caution. And in being hyper cautious, he's unwilling to allow you to live your life, not that he can really stop you, not because he's malevolent or he wants to control you, but because he wants to control his fiefdom. And right now, you're in his designated area of care. The result of all of this, on top of the layers of the unknown, and let's be honest and real here, there are lots of unknowns about the virus. But the result is as well, between the unknowns and the fiefdoms and the government empowerment and the government incompetence, there's an overall lack of risk-taking. The government did a good job with Operation Warp Speed, thanks to Donald Trump, by the way, and took risks to get vaccines out into the public under emergency orders rapidly, and they're remarkable. Yes. In lab tests where you're giving people super doses of this vaccine, you've got a 5% chance of getting the vaccine. You have a 0% chance of dying from COVID after you've been vaccinated. You have a 0% chance of overwhelming hospitals after you've been vaccinated. But there's still this risk, there's still this chance, there's still this concern. And the government lacks the ability to take risks. Bureaucrats are not empowered to be risk takers. And when we outsource this to public health officials who are ultimately careerist bureaucrats, they don't want you to take risks, not because of their malevolence, not because they're wanting to control you, but because they are incapable of accurately assessing risk as bureaucrats. In the private sector, we all make risks. Do I get this loan or do I get that loan? If I get this loan, will I be able to meet these bill obligations? If I send my kids to this school, what sort of education will they get? How will it set them up for the future? It's all about risk taking. It's all about compromise. It's all about probabilities. The government doesn't do that well anymore. I don't know that the government has ever done that well. But right now, on a supposed war footing for the vaccine, the government is totally incompetent at risk-taking, which is why the approach in places like Texas and Georgia and Florida and Arizona is so much better than the like places in New York and in New Jersey and Michigan, because those states have all along been very forthright with what the risks were and then told you go live your life. Let me just take Georgia as an example here with Brian Kemp. Remember, he was attacked by President Trump for reopening Georgia sooner than every other state. And what people around the country don't know about him is he flew around the state constantly and drove the state constantly telling people, wear a mask. I'm not going to mandate it, but wear a mask, wash your hands, keep your distance. Here's what we know about the virus. And he went to every community in the state. He said, here's what we know right now about the virus. And here's what we think right now you should do. And as the advice changed based on knowledge of the virus, he went around the state and changed the advice. He said, okay, now we know this, so do this. But he went around the state and told the people, he said, I'm not going to shut you down. I'm not going to shut down your business. Who am I, a government official, to tell you your business isn't essential? I'm not going to mandate a mask, but I'm going to keep you educated so you can make your decisions. And we've seen this around the country, in Florida, in Georgia, in South Carolina, in a lot of southern states that are rugged individualists, the government realizing we can't demand you do these things, so we're going to keep you educated so you can make the risk assessment. Right now, our government bureaucrats believe they should make the risk assessment for us, And we're not going to get over this pandemic, and we're not going to get through it to a new normal as long as we continue to outsource ourselves, our ability to think critically and make risks to the government. And ultimately, it is on us and not on them. Why? Because they can't lock you in your house. You've locked yourself in your house at this point. For a month, while hospitals built up resources, it may have made up sense. But right now, use common sense, get the vaccine, and then go live your life. That should be the message. I want everybody to be able to go back out to your local watering hole and grab a beer, not have to worry about a mask or a virus. And the way to do that, go get the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine, get both rounds, and go live your life. And stop listening to government talking heads.
You're listening to the Erick Erickson Show, the perfect.
Hi there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, if you would like to be a part of the program, is 877-97-ERICK, E-R-I-C-K, 877-973-7425. Now, man, I'm just shaking everything up today. At the bottom of the hour, this hour, Matt Shafer is going to join me. Matt Shafer is a state representative in Texas. And he is in the House of Representatives there, where the House in Texas is about to consider election reform, and the same thing that happened in Georgia is now happening in Texas. Now, here's the thing you got to understand in Texas is that Donald Trump and the GOP won. In fact, they did way better than everybody thought. Remember in 2018, everybody's like, oh, Texas is going to turn blue. It didn't happen. In fact, in 2020, remember all the Henry, Joe Biden might spend money in Texas. Joe Biden, he's giving Donald Trump a run. It's the Latino vote in Texas. It's going to go for Joe Biden. Actually, it went for Donald Trump pretty significantly. The border counties in Texas, having been overwhelmingly Democrat, swung heavily to Donald Trump and the GOP. Turns out law and order was a big issue there. And now this border crisis that Joe Biden has created by getting rid of Donald Trump's regulations is turning against them. Well, Texas had some problems in the election. They had problems very much like in Georgia, where in Georgia, for example, the whole Karen feeding of voters at the polls, it's always been against the law, but local Democratic officials are saying, well, they mentioned things of value you couldn't give to voters within 150 feet. A slice of pizza isn't of value. It's taking care of the voter. So that's why the legislature had to go clarify and say, no, actually, that's considered giving an inducement to a voter to vote within 150 feet of the polls. You can't electioneer. Texas very similarly had local Democrats in different counties doing very similar things, including drive-through 24-hour voting, basically treating it like a 24-hour McDonald's. You're going through and cast your ballot. It's stuff you're not supposed to do because of voter integrity and election integrity. No one in Texas argues that the vote in Texas was stolen, unlike in Georgia. But they clearly had some problems because Democrats were taking very liberal readings of laws they shouldn't do. So the Texas legislature is having to get involved and having to clarify that some of the things Democrats did claiming laws were vague, they got to beef up. So naturally, here comes Apple and Amazon and Dell and other major corporations and Black Lives Matter and the NCAA and the NAACP and everyone else telling Texas they're racist, bigoted, terrible, awful, and they're going to be punished for daring to clean up their election laws. It has made it through the Texas Senate. It's now in the Texas House. And I figure there's no better way to get an update than from a member of the Texas House on what is up with Texas and the corporate pushback about all of this as corporations go woke. So stick around. When we come back, I'm going to talk to Matt Shafer. He will know what's going on in the Texas legislature because this is going to be a national story. There are 23 states, and the wokes are coming for all of them doing this election reform. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here across the nation. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I have asked State Representative Matt Shafer from Tyler, Texas to join me this morning because Texas is going through the election reform process that Georgia went through. There are 23 states that are considering election reform bills, including states like California, which you will notice isn't getting national media attention. And every single one of the Republican states considering any level of election reform, no matter how reasonable, are seeing corporate and woke protests against them. Georgia started it, and now the fight has moved to Texas. And Matt Shafer, I wanted to get him here. He joins me by phone. Matt, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being able to do this. So what's the latest in Texas with the election reform measure?
Election integrity is a top priority for Republicans. We have legislation that is moving through the process, and we're going to get it done. Big tech, these big corporations, them and the Democratic Party have just become one big self-licking ice cream cone, and all this stuff that they're doing now to threaten the state of Texas is going to backfire. Because I can tell you, myself and my colleagues in the Republican caucus, we are not intimidated one bit.
Well, it would be great. Let's delve into some of the specifics here, because one of them comes from Harris County, which is Houston, where you had local officials were deciding essentially to send every single registered voter an absentee ballot application, even if they hadn't requested one. You've got other situations where people were showing up and volunteering to help senior citizens cast their vote, even if they had no relationship to them. And local officials turned a blind eye. You had the Austin city government doing the typical Austin stuff. My goodness, that place is becoming the San Francisco of Texas. And all these local election officials then using local Democratic judges to bless them. And at least in the Harris County situation, if I understand it right, the Texas Supreme Court had to intervene and say, you can't send every single person an absentee ballot because that's against the law. And yet the Democrats keep trying to do this stuff.
That's right. One of the things that the Democrat-controlled election officials in Houston and Harris County want to do is just kind of do their own thing, right? They want to say, well, we think we can do it, and so we're going to do it. So one aspect of the bill that's moving through the House is going to make sure that we have a uniform and consistent voting process all over the state. And local election officials are not going to be able to just say, you know what, we're going to go it alone, and we're going to try something that's not found in state law. And we know why they want to do it. They want to tip the balance in favor of Democrat voters.
Yeah. Now, if I understand right, because I don't live there, but I think anyone created in the image of God understands that Texas is God's country, so you pay attention to it. That you used to have vote by party, and in 2018, a lot of good people lost because Democratic activists were just choosing to vote straight Democrat, and now that's done away with, and that to some degree has helped bring more reasonableness back to some of the candidates in Texas.
Yes, we got rid of straight ticket voting in the state of Texas, and I voted in favor of that change. And one of the reasons that I like it, Eric, is just one for a civics reason. It forces a voter to go from president all the way down to a little emergency services district or a bottom of the ballot city council and see each name and each position on the ballot, where sometimes that voter may not even realize that position exists. Mm-hmm. And so when they come into the poll, they're going to at least know that there is some government entity that has an influence on their life, and they need to weigh in on it.
Now, let me ask you about the corporate influence, because Michael Dell has now come out. So in Georgia, we had Delta and Coca-Cola and Home Depot come out. Now you've got Amazon, Apple, Dell, and other companies coming out in Texas. And one of the things I find hilarious is Democrats who have blasted corporations for speaking up in the past on, for example, fiscal regulatory issues, are suddenly singing their praises for speaking up for Democratic positions on election reform. And are you guys worried at all about any of the potential economic fallout from pursuing this legislation?
No, because I think these corporations are going to find out that their customers don't agree with them, and that average Texans want election integrity measures passed. There is a lot of hypocrisy going on here. They have no trouble doing business in China or Delta, flying to places like Hong Kong, where we know that real human rights abuses are taking place, where real abuses of the electoral process are taking place. So there's a lot of hypocrisy. And all of these corporations have dozens and dozens of high-paid lobbyists that roam the hallways here in the Capitol, making sure that their favored tax breaks stay in place or asking for new ones. And not once did they come by and visit with lawmakers before these bills started moving and say, we're really concerned about these election integrity bills. There's a lot of hypocrisy. This is just corporations going woke, doing work and bidding for the Biden-Harris administration and the Democrat Party. It's as plain as day. Look, the Democrats want open borders and loose elections.
Right.
And in my mind, those things go together. They really do. They see that the people that are pouring across the border in the state of Texas are future voters. And they want loose elections. They really don't want the state of Texas to come down and clamp down on local election administrators who are bending the rules.
Yeah, you mentioned open borders, and if you don't mind me shifting gears with you, and I realize you're in Tyler, which is the part of Texas that still has trees. Being a native of Louisiana, my mom has a ton of family that moved to Houston, and she always swore that Houston was the furthest west she could move because you still had trees there. and you get down into South Texas, though, they're hard to find. But what's really easy to find are a lot of people across the border. Chip Roy, the congressman from down in South Texas, is a longtime friend of mine, and twice now he's been at the border doing interviews as illegal aliens were trying to cross the border. What is this overall? And again, I realize where you are in Texas is a great deal away from the border, but what's this doing to the resources in Texas right now?
It's going to put a tremendous strain on our foster care system. That's not getting a lot of attention in the media, but we always have challenges with our foster care system, finding enough families to take care of these children. But we are now adding tremendous pressure on the foster care system, not to mention our public schools. The public schools are required by law to bring these students in, to help them learn English, teach them math, to make sure they have meals to eat while they're there, and we have to hire new teachers. And, it's hard to do a word problem in math if you can't read.
Right.
And if English is your second language, it's a challenge for our public schools. So this is a huge problem. If people in the rest of the country don't realize, it's a federal responsibility, but it is a state of Texas problem that we deal with every day. I'd love to buy a bunch of bus tickets and hotel rooms in San Francisco and say, welcome to San Francisco. Take on some of this burden that we deal with every day. And I think it's going to backfire on the Democrats. This is not good for Democrats in the state of Texas. Many of those counties, several of those counties right on the border that are traditionally Democrat, voted for Trump.
Right.
They voted for Trump on the border. Donald Trump was so racist, Eric, that he did better with minorities than he did the first election.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that as my next question, that it was remarkable to me. Some of those counties down there went 60-40 Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump, and 4 years later, 60-40 Trump against Biden. And the law and order and the border issue seemed to be what really flipped those people when they've been surveyed. And now suddenly the Biden administration comes in and says, well, we're going to undo every single thing Donald Trump did at the border. And now look what happened.
If you live on the border, you don't want chaos in your community. You don't want human trafficking of people from El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras pouring through your neighborhoods, coming across the river and rattling your doors and your windows at night to see if they can get in. These are real issues. The drugs that are coming through, the human trafficking, these people are basically being sold. They are commodities to the cartels down there. And it's a horrible situation. And whatever you're hearing on Fox News, or listening to on the radio, it's just as bad or worse. Trust me. This is a serious problem, and the Democrats really have a problem on their hands. But it's not going to change until the policies are changed, and I don't see Joe Biden changing the policy.
No, I don't see him doing that either, which is remarkable. Looking at even when the Washington Post now is admitting that the Trump policy of keeping people in Central America seeking amnesty worked well. It's flabbergasting to see. One last question for you. My wife is in the other room and she's listening to us talk. My wife loves Austin, Texas. She's a quilter. She loves you. In fact, there's what is this? There's a place outside of Tyler with some lady who makes fabric that she loves. What's that place called? Bascom, Texas. And
Okay.
but she loves Austin and the quilting, and she just wants to know, what are you people in the legislature going to do to get the hippies from stopping ruining the capital of Texas with the tent cities and all?
Well, when my friends talk about secession, I say, okay, but what do we do with Austin? You know. So every time I am done with session and I jump in the truck and I call my dad, I say, Dad, I'm in the truck headed back to Texas. So Austin is a great place to visit, but it's got some real challenges right now.
Yeah,
We hope the people that are moving here from California don't bring their values with them.
Well, we've got that problem in Atlanta where I am. The woke hipsters who move in from California for these tech companies and can't imagine living in a democratic republic that isn't socialist. So, listen, I appreciate you spending some time with me. This has been highly educational. Really, really do appreciate it.
Eric, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Matt Shafer, state representative over in Tyler, Texas, knows his stuff, and glad to have him. Now, I can tell you the committee in the Texas House has moved forward with the election reform measure. Only the Republicans voted for it. It's amazing watching the media coverage in Texas, even compared to what happened in Georgia. It's like they've got their talking points in order now, and they are vehemently opposed to this. And the media now is walking in lockstep against the Texas reforms, when what they leave out, and this is really, really important, is I know because I talk to a lot of friends of mine, members of Congress, members of the state legislature in Texas, who I've gotten to know over the years, who say very much like in Georgia, it's the response to the election reform package there is because Democrats changed the rules of the election in the middle of the election. And there's well-settled precedent. You can't do that. And yet they were trying to do it. And the Texas Supreme Court had to constantly intervene and stop them from changing the rules in the middle of the election. And they were changing the rules by saying that the rules were very vague. So all the Texas legislature is doing is clarifying the things the Democrats claimed were vague aren't vague, and that the things the Democrats try to do to get around them are now heightened and explained more clearly in the law so that they can't do it. But you literally in Harris County, Texas, and you need to understand this, Harris County is the Houston area. It had been fairly Republican. It got progressive in the interior core. You had that mayor who persecuted churches down there. But when in 2018, the state kind of flipped by Democrats checking party line voting, they all voted Democrat and wiped out a lot of people, even Democrats. I remember the night of that election laughing, watching progressives say they couldn't believe so-and-so lost. They loved the guy. Well, it's because that guy was actually a Republican and they had no idea. And now the Democrats in Harris County literally decided to send out absentee ballot applications to every single registered voter, even though Texas law says you can't. They did it with the blessing of a local judge, and the Texas Supreme Court said, nope, you can't do that. And so the legislature has to clarify this stuff. And somehow they're the bad guys. But you will notice that after the Georgia fight, now headed into the Texas reform package. By the way, this heads to Wisconsin next. The Wisconsin legislature is doing election reform up there, fixing some of the things Democrats try to do up there. But in Texas now, the corporations, the NCAA, the NAACP, the Democrats, the wokes, they're all in lockstep, and they got the media giving the Democrat talking points nationwide, and they're leaving out all the little details that Matt Shafer and I have just pointed out to you as to why this is necessary. You got to come here for the truth.
You can follow Erick around social media
Rocco's in Jasper, Georgia is having their first annual Rockin' Affair to celebrate reopening, warm weather, getting outside. People have gotten vaccinated. They can all hang out in person. They're looking for vendors. Anywhere you're listening to my voice, if you're a vendor and you want to show up for a mass gathering of people, it's going to be free to the public. Go to roccosjasper.com. You can go to their Facebook page. They've got Reformation Brewery. They got Coca-Cola. They got a lot of partners partnering with them to make this event happen. And if you're a vendor, they want your help as well. They want to give you the opportunity with a mass gathering of people in the state of Georgia, celebrating the warm weather, celebrating spring, celebrating just being back to normal as we can possibly get. They want your help. Go to roccosjasper.com and check them out. This event is going to be May 1st and 2nd, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. There's going to be food. There's going to be music. There's going to be children. By the way, if you're in the public and you want to go up to beautiful North Georgia, hang out at Rocco's. Bikers are welcome, by the way. It's biker friendly. So go to roccosjasper.com if you're a vendor. Sign up. Show your wares. Show your goods. Show your services. Be with people. I need to say, the idea of being able to get back to people. So Rome, Georgia is one of the prettiest cities in America. In fact, if you've ever seen the Dead Poets Society, to give you a sense of just how beautiful Rome, Georgia is, Dead Poets Society was filmed at Berry College. It's gorgeous up there. And I've got some listeners. The show is on in Rome. And I got some listeners who have been dying to get me up there for bourbon and cigars. And I'm ready to go now. I've been vaccinated. I'm ready to get out of the house. I want to get around the country and start traveling as we start picking up affiliates and just hanging out with people. Going out, grab a beer, hang out, have a cigar. A buddy of mine sent me a box of cigars the other day. I've got to find a giant humidor because my cigar collection, I don't actually smoke cigars constantly. Like, I got Philip who works for me. He's got like multiple cigars a day, and he's half my age and looks twice as old as me, probably from the cigars. But nonetheless, it's not a regular habit, but people keep sending me boxes of really, really nice cigars, and I'm afraid they're going to get ruined. I've got to find them. Like surely there's some craftsman out there who can build a nice. I don't have the money for it, though. That's the problem. I got to find a big humidor. I had to borrow one of Philip's humidors to be able to fit all these cigars. The Davidoff folks and the Fuentes and the Cohiba people and then others sending me stuff. But it'll be nice to get out in the public again. That's why it's so maddening to me that the government is muddling the message on the vaccine so much. I mean, isn't it a more compelling message to say, if you get the vaccine, you don't have to wear the mask anymore? If you get the vaccine, you can have people to your house. We had people at our house the other day. For the first time in a year, I actually fired up the smoker, smoked a Boston butt, made mac and cheese. My wife has this incredible baked bean recipe. I'll have to send out that recipe at some point. But we had a great time. We actually had live human beings in our house, which we have not done since February of last year. And we had people at our house. We actually had to stay up and do dishes. It was the most profound thing. We didn't even use paper plates. Your life can go back to normal with the vaccine. Now, I realize there are people who are hesitant to take the vaccine. I've got friends of mine who refuse to take it, and that's fine. But if the majority of people get the vaccine, those who have chosen not to get the vaccine, they will they're not going to have to worry about overwhelmed hospitals if they get the virus. And in fact, their chance of getting the virus goes down the more other people get the vaccine. I just don't understand why the government is doing this, except for the fact that the government is well and truly incompetent. And that's something we all need to internalize here. The government bureaucracy is adverse to taking risks. So many people, this is why, by the way, government conspiracies aren't really a thing necessarily. Because one, they can't keep a secret in the government, everybody leaks. And two, they're too incompetent to pull off a conspiracy. So many people view like the QAnon stuff. I'm sorry, but the government is not competent enough to run a pool of satanic child pedophiles through the CIA. They're just not, the CIA itself is not competent enough to do that. Once you understand that it's incompetence and not malevolence, it all starts to make sense. But we've got to talk about malevolence when we come back. The NCAA has decided any state that cracks down on transgender athletes in sports, boys on girls teams is really what this is about. If you don't want a boy on a girls team and your state passes a law to protect girls sports, the NCAA is going to punish your state and harm it economically. This is the malevolence of the wokes. And we need to talk about the malevolence of the wokes and the NCAA when we come back right here on the Erick Erickson Show. We'll take your phone calls as well, 877-973-7425. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. Delighted to have you with me. Should you like to call in and be a part of this here program, the number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Importantly, tomorrow is Wednesday, and on Wednesday, I send out a recipe. I do. For those of you who don't know, I like to cook. Just look at me. I like to eat too. And every Wednesday, I send out a recipe. This week will be peanut butter Rice Krispie treats. Yes, it is a thing, and they are delicious. If you want the recipe, text the word recipe to 33777, and you'll get a link back. You click the link, put in your email address. You don't get spam. You don't get any of that. All you do is you get a wonderful, delicious recipe every Wednesday. As always, you can go to ewerickson.com as well. EWERICKSON.com. You can get the live stream of the show. You can read what I'm writing about. You can get the recipes. There's a designated recipe tab. You can always find me on social media at EW Erickson, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. I'm always there. Now, we've got to get into, well, making you care. Years ago, it has been a long time now, I came up with a phrase by accident. I was the editor at the time of redstate.com, and this was during the height of the gay marriage fights in the country, and a guy came in to the comments. He says, I don't care. I don't care about the issue. I don't care what they do. It doesn't affect me. It's not going to impact me. It's not going to impact my church. It's not going to do anything. I don't care. And I replied to him. I said, you're going to be made to care. One way or the other, you will be made to care. You will be forced to pick a side on this issue. The left, the secularists, will not allow you to stand on the sideline. You will be made to care. That phrase, it actually turned it into a book on the rise of the wokes persecuting Christians in this country. The book is called You Will Be Made to Care. And it documented, for example, the city of Atlanta firing their fire chief for writing a book for his Sunday school class. It documented at the University or Georgia Tech, highlighted how they persecuted two students, tried to drive them from campus for being Christians. Highlighted the case of Beryl Stutzman, the florist in Oregon, or in Washington rather, who would not provide flowers for a gay wedding. The gay couple did not file a suit against her, but the state found out about it and persecuted her anyway. And around the country goes. You will be made to care. There's the case of Jack Phillips, the baker in Denver, Colorado, who is an artisan. He makes elaborate cakes. He does not make the cakes for divorced couples getting remarried. He does not make the cakes for Halloween. He doesn't put depictions of Jesus on cakes. He's devoutly religious. And he will not make a cake for a transitioning ceremony or for a gay wedding. And for the latter two, he is being prosecuted, harassed, litigated against. They're trying to shut him down just for standing for his convictional values. Now, there are plenty of bakeries around him, but the wokes have decided that the alphabet gang rights are identical to the civil rights struggle of the 1960s, even though we never fought a civil war, we never enslaved them, we never had to amend the Constitution. It's the same thing to them. They cannot distinguish. The latest, of course, is the fight over transgender rights. Notice how, in fact, I commented to my kid the other day who just threw out LGBTQ. It used to be LGB community. And at some point in the last few years, it's went to LGBT community. And really in the last 2 years, it's gone very quickly to LGBTQ. We keep adding the other letters, LGBTQIAATP something or other, the alphabet gang, as Dave Chappelle calls them. The NCAA has decided to pick a side in this. States around the country have decided to pass laws that prohibit boys from playing on girl sports. Now, this is not a common thing. You should know this. This is not a common thing. In many of the states where these laws are being passed, it has not happened. We have not encountered these things. The left likes to point that out, but the left also likes to say all the things the right claimed on slippery slopes when it came, for example, to arguments on marriage would never happen. And now today there's a story in the paper about an adult wanting to marry their adult child, and they're possibly going to be able to. We're now learning about thruples and quadruples. That is 3 people in a relationship, 4 people in a relationship. We got the person who wants to marry their inflatable sex toy, and on, all the stuff. No, when we threw these, remember Rick Santorum, former senator from Pennsylvania, threw out these examples of things that would, no, you bigot, that'll never happen. And next thing you know, yes, they do want to marry their horse. Well, the NCAA and the woke say you're never going to have to worry about your daughter competing against a boy on the playing field, except it has happened and is happening. It is not very common, but as the for some reason there's some sort of issue in the water where all of a sudden more and more kids are declaring themselves transgender. Maybe Alex Jones was right all along. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, Philip sends me this story. Where is it? This is from the New York Post. A New York parent is seeking the okay to marry their own adult child. A New Yorker who wants to marry their own adult child is suing to overturn laws barring the incestuous practice, calling it a matter of individual autonomy. The pining parent seeks to remain anonymous because their request is an action that a large segment of society views as morally, socially, and biologically repugnant. Though the enduring bond of marriage, 2 persons, whatever relationship they might otherwise have with one another, can find a great level of expression, intimacy, and spirituality, the parent argues in Manhattan federal court. Legal papers give only the barest picture of the would-be newlyweds, failing to identify their gender, ages, hometowns, or the nature of their relationship. The proposed spouses are adults. The proposed spouses are biological parent and child. The proposed spouses are unable to procreate together. Incest is a 3rd-degree felony under New York law, punishable by up to 4 years behind bars, and incestuous marriages are considered void, with the spouses facing a fine and 6 months in jail. In 2014, a state appeals court unanimously approved a case involving a woman married to her mother's half-brother, noting the genetic relationship was the equivalent of first cousins, but even that ruling cited the almost universal horror with which a parent-child marriage is viewed. The parent in the new case, who hears wedding bells when looking at their own kid, said they want to propose, but would sustain emotional harm if they did so while the current law is in effect. No slippery. I had a law school professor once who said, it's only a slippery slope if you choose to slide. Well, society always chooses to slide. Now the NCAA wants states to be made to care. Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas, vetoed legislation in Arkansas that would prohibit transgender athletes from playing on the sports of the gender they identify with. Now, what the NCAA in their statement says, and if you want to read it, text the word data to 33777. I'll send you back my piece that I wrote on this, and it's got the quote from the NCAA. The NCAA Board of Governors firmly and unequivocally supports the opportunity for transgender student athletes to compete in college sports. The committee is grounded in our values for inclusion and fair competition. Now, pay attention here. They firmly and unequivocally support the opportunity for transgender student athletes to compete in college sports. I think every right-thinking American supports the right of any student athlete to compete in college sports. The question is, should they compete in the sport of the gender they identify with or of their biological sex? You know, there are some people now, like that idiot reporter at CNN the other day, who claim there's not even scientific consensus on how to determine biological sex. Actually, a reporter actually said that in an actual non-opinion piece. These are the people who also want to claim all this is perfectly normal. No one opposes boys playing on boys' teams and girls playing on girls' teams. The question is, if you're a boy and you want to play on girls' teams? And notice it almost always is the boy wanting to play on the girls' team. And in multiple instances, we've seen boys who would never qualify to compete against other boys because of their times and their lack of athletic ability. They suddenly play on the girls' teams and they're dominant. There are people in this country who are against vaccines. A lot of them are actually socially progressive. There are some in the Christian community and others who are anti-vaccine. Some of them have moral concerns because a lot of vaccines derive from aborted fetal tissue cell. But a large number of people oppose vaccinations because they believe that the vaccine causes autism or other bodily harm. And the doctors who advocate this, you have doctors who went to Johns Hopkins and Harvard and Yale, and they advocate this, and society treats them as fringe. There are also doctors, just like the anti-vaccine people have highly educated, highly qualified doctors saying, yes, vaccines give autism. There are highly educated, highly qualified doctors who say that once a boy decides he becomes a girl, his testosterone doesn't impact him. If he takes testosterone blockers, if he gets chemically castrated, it doesn't matter. The science actually says otherwise, by the way. The real world data out there on this of boys who become girls, they take testosterone blockers, they go through chemical castration, whatever. Their body physically is designed and is more often than not stronger and more capable than many of the women athletes. This is scientific, this is observed, and yet the left and the media want to ignore the scientific overwhelming evidence and the scientists who say actually there are biological differences between boys and girls that give boys more athletic prowess than girls. And they want to focus on the fringe who say, once they're chemically castrated, it's no big deal. You can find a scientist to tell you what you want to hear. Look at the number of people who go online and get their confirmation biases out of videos about the vaccine and the virus. But the reality is that there's a pressure campaign being built from the left on this. There's a pressure campaign being built from the secularists. There's a pressure campaign being built from the wokes against communities. Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson vetoed the legislation. If you look closely, you could see a Walmart lobbyist with his arm up Hutchinson's rectum, moving his mouth like a muppet. The Arkansas legislature overrode the veto. There will now be pressure on them to back down because of financial concerns, and the NCAA will make it about financial concerns. The question for conservatives is going to have to be, do you stand for your values? Do you stand for your faith? Do you stand for common sense, science, and sanity? Or do you stand for money? Because you've got on one side common sense, science, and sanity saying boys cannot become girls. And you've got on the other side the insanity of the modern age saying, oh, yes, they can. Which side are you going to stand on? You know, not to dive deep into theology here, but in Genesis 1, Moses wrote Genesis. And Moses uses the word bara. It is a Hebrew word. And every time God makes something, it's bara. When men make something that's not, bara is essential divine creation. It's creation in a way you and I can't do. So when the men built the Tower of Babel in Genesis 6, it was not bara. When God created man and woman, it was bara. When God made them male and female, it was bara. God made them male and female. We are creation, not creator. We cannot create male and female. Only God can. And yet we have decided otherwise. Now, Paul in Romans 1 writes that God is woven throughout nature. He's reflected in all of nature. We see this biologically. There are exceptions, but overwhelmingly every species has male and female. Yes, there are exceptions. The left, which thinks that we're just like all the other animals on the planet, just we can think and speak. And even they can probably think we can just speak in ways we understand. They want to focus on the exceptions. What about this random rare exception? It's proof then that this is real. No, actually, it's the exception that proves the rule. But the secular world, corporate America, they're all in this together because it's mammon versus God, are making conservatives pick. Ron DeSantis has this fight in Florida now. Will the Florida legislature pass a transgender sports ban? We'll see. Do they choose God or do they choose mammon? And we should note for those who say, well, you're just trying to impose your values on others. No, you can't impose the natural order on the natural order, which is all we're standing up for is the natural order. It's the other side trying to impose insanity on the rest of us. And those of us who can speak up and speak the truth should still speak up and speak the truth about this stuff. And fewer people can. They get boycotted. Their advertisers get targeted. I'm sure some of my advertisers will get harassed. Stations will get harassed for having me. But as long as I can, I should be willing to speak up for the truth, because truth at the end of the day still matters most.
There's not my truth or your truth. There is.
I am so impressed with the Eden Pure Thunderstorm, and I know you will be as well. My son and I have to get allergy shots, and I actually had to go get mine yesterday. I'm feeling my allergies in large part because I haven't been using the Eden Pure Thunderstorm because he swiped it from me. But you know, the corollary is he has not been able to get his allergy shot in weeks because soccer and after school projects. We hadn't been able to get him over there in time before they closed to be able to get his allergy shots. But we've been running the Eden Pure Thunderstorm in his room. It is a small handheld air purifier. It can create ozone. It can get rid of bacteria and mold and mildew. It can wipe out odors. I actually had to put one in the kitchen the other day to get rid of the odors from a fish fry, and it works so well. But the Eden Pure that he runs in his room, he has, despite not getting his allergy shots for the last month, he has woken up every morning without the big, cloggy, nasty, goopy nose. So he has eliminated an excuse to get out of going to school, frankly. And it's all because of the Eden Pure thunderstorm. We real world observation. We've seen this thing work. This thing, it is portable. You can plug it up in your car. You can take it with you wherever you go. It is a small handheld. It's got a USB connection to be able to plug it in. It plugs into the wall. It's great. If you want to try one, go to Eden, like the Garden of Eden, EdenPureDeals.com. They're going to give you $10 off the lowest sales price if you use the code word Erick. That would be my first name, ERICK, at checkout. You can also, if you go to EdenPureDeals.com, you can see me on the front page there. Y'all, this really is it. What a tremendous technology. I've got a massive air purifier for my back porch, bought in thinking of, I can sit back there and smoke cigars when it's cold, but unfortunately, the cigar smoke still filters into the house, so I have to stand outside and freeze. Nonetheless, that sucker is like the size of R2-D2 and just as heavy. Now, the Eden Pure, you can hold it in your hand, carry it around, take it room to room, wherever you are. It is great. Go to EdenPureDeals.com. And if my son were here, he could tell you that, unfortunately for him, the downside of the Eden Pure thunderstorm is that he can't wake up in the morning and claim he's too congested and feeling bad to go to school because it has taken out his allergies. Good for us, bad for him. EdenPureDeals.com. Now, when we come back here, we gotta move into the other news of the day beyond the NCAA and the wokes, in particular the Minneapolis shooting, which is really unfortunate. And I was actually somewhat flabbergasted, and I guess I should give credit to the New York Times yesterday that ran a story and noted that the officer who shot the guy in Minneapolis, or outside Minneapolis, that pulled her gun instead of her taser. Though, wait a second, this is kind of actually interesting that we haven't learned it was a female police officer. They were slow to release her identity. Now we're kind of knowing this. Other people, I'm sure, will have the jokes. I'm going to avoid the jokes. Serious issue. This police officer thought she was pulling her taser. In the camera, you hear her yell, "Taser, taser, taser." And then she fires him and releases profanity that she shot him. Clearly thought she had her taser, and she killed the guy. And yet they want to defund the police
15.
So they don't even get that training. What about the training they need to not confuse their taser and their gun? Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. You can feel free to call in at 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425 if you would like to be a part of the program. Minneapolis is rioting. It's what people do these days when the police do something, at least there. Notice in Virginia, you've had the situation with the soldier who was pulled over. They arrested. Man, can I just, as an aside here, I am really, 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 really disappointed in some people on my side for their handling of the story in Virginia, including some people on TV. The soldier in Virginia who was pulled over by the police, everything is caught on camera. And there are people who say, well, he was treated that way because he had a gun on him. The police had to be careful because he had a gun on him. First of all, he was a legal gun owner. And we should not want to say police get to treat you badly because you're a legal gun owner. Second, if you watch the body cam footage, as my friend Steve Gutowski points out at the Washington Free Beacon, he's the best Second Amendment reporter in the country, supremely pro-Second Amendment. He pointed out that the police were not even aware of the guy's gun until after they detained him. And it's ridiculous to see people defending bad police behavior. Listen, I've got a lot of listeners who are police. A ton of my listeners are first responders, police and fire, EMS. I hear from them a lot. And they are almost to a person appalled at what they see as really shoddy police work in cases. It gives all of them a bad name. But what really frustrates them are two separate things. On the one side, you have the media and the left want to presume every police officer is as incompetent as those we see in these scandals. And on the other side, that they have people who want to defend the police at all costs and make everyone else look bad, which then prevents actual reform, real solid reform and education from happening. So take the one in Virginia where you've got people on TV. Greg Kelly from Newsmax is one who went on a Twitter tirade about, well, the guy deserved to be treated that way because he had a gun on him and didn't make it clear he had a gun, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's a law-abiding soldier with a license to carry who lawfully owned his gun. Why should gun owners get to be treated worse by the police? And he was going so gung-ho into defending the police, he was attacking the right to keep and bear arms as a result. On the other hand, you've got, what's her name, Elena Presley and others out there, the left-wing congresswoman, who yet again want to defund the police over all this stuff. Daunte Wright is the shooting victim in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. The city manager has been relieved of duties in Brooklyn Center because the city manager had the audacity to call for due process for the police officer. Brooklyn City Manager Kurt Bogney was fired on Monday evening, hours after he publicly disagreed with Mayor Mike Elliott's assertion that the police officer who fatally shot a black man in the Minneapolis suburb should be immediately fired in response to the incident. Effective immediately, our city manager has been relieved of his duties, and the deputy city manager will be assuming his duties moving forward. Elliott wrote on Twitter, "I will continue to work my hardest to ensure good leadership at all levels of our city government." Daunte Wright, 20, was fatally shot during a traffic stop. Body cam footage showed 3 officers gathered near a stopped car that police said was pulled over for an expired registration. Police attempted to arrest the man, later identified as Wright, for an outstanding warrant. A struggle ensued, followed by the fatal shooting. Brooklyn Center Police Chief Tim Gannon said the officer who shot and killed Wright had intended to fire a laser, not their service weapon. Now, the next sentence says authorities not released the name of the female officer involved in the shooting. But that doesn't make it clear because there were 3 officers. Notice the use of the word their as opposed to her service weapon. The Brooklyn City Council voted to fire Bogney, a longtime city employee, during an emergency meeting, and voted to give the mayor command authority over the city's police department. Y'all, let me play this soundbite from the mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota.
But we also have to tackle some questions. We have to address some really hard questions. We have to address them in our police departments. We have to address them in our city halls. We have to address them in our state legislature. We have to ask ourselves, why, how does this keep happening over and over again in America, in the world, in Minnesota? We have to know that the first law of motion is that objects in motion will remain in motion until some force stops it from happening. And so when we recognize this strong, horrific trend that keeps happening over and over and over again, we have to know that Daunte Wright will not be the last name, will not be the last hashtag on this list until and unless we take decisive and urgent action to ensure that he is.
You know what's not going to help in the future? Defunding the police. Defunding the police, which is the answer of the left these days, is actually going to make the situation worse. You have a police officer who said she was pulling her taser, yelled to the guy, taser, then bam! Shot and killed him. It says, holy S word, I fired my gun. And you can hear, she's staggeringly astonished. The question should be, how is a police officer confused between her taser and her gun? But we should be a little outraged, I think, as well, at the denial of due process. Everyone deserves due process. To fire the city manager in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, and I realize people are on edge, there's rioting, there's looting, but to fire the city manager for saying that the police officer deserves due process, everybody deserves due process, including an officer who clearly seriously screwed up. But there's also something else here that we shouldn't dance around this, because this is also fact. The victim, Daunte Wright, should not be dead. He, 20 years old, should be alive. The gross incompetence of the police officer who pulled her gun thinking she pulled her taser, shooting and killing him, is horrific. But he would also be alive if he were not driving with an expired tag, which led to him getting pulled over, which led to the police discovering he had an outstanding warrant, which led to a struggle, which led to a massive police screw-up. We can try to make this racial if we want, but there's no reason to, because you know what? If a car with an expired tag got pulled over and there was a white dude in the car who had an outstanding warrant, guess what would have happened? No, contrary to you engaged in victimology here, the white dude would have gotten thrown in the back of the car as well. Question is, would the white guy have struggled and run? Yeah, the police officer screwed up. You can see it from the body cam. It appears that she really did get her taser and her gun confused. She will live with that for the rest of her life, in or out of prison. She'll probably be charged with manslaughter. But we should also not dance around the fact that Mr. Wright would also be alive had he not chosen to struggle and run. And so much of that gets lost. And there are people out there who say, well, if he was white. No, I've got friends who had, in fact, I've got a friend in particular who had an outstanding warrant for failure to pay a whole bunch of traffic tickets. I mean, a massive pile of traffic tickets. This dude never paid traffic tickets. And he was pulled over and arrested. His car left on the side of the road. I get really frustrated with these conversations because the obvious answer is the one that people don't want to go to because they would much prefer to scream about racism here. But the obvious answer is if you're driving around in a car with an expired tag and you get pulled over, don't struggle with the police, particularly if you have an outstanding warrant. This isn't rocket science. And somehow I'm the bad guy for saying that. I'm the one who people are going to get mad at for saying if you got an outstanding warrant and the police pull you over, don't struggle with the police. You should be outraged that a police officer had such terrible training, she got her gun and her taser confused. But you should mitigate that outrage with the fact that they pulled over a guy with an expired tag, he had an outstanding warrant, and he struggled. All of this is on the body cam footage. You should be, I think, more outraged at the situation in Virginia where you have a soldier in his brand new vehicle gets pulled over by the police and the way they treat him. And by the way, there's a side angle here, is it was not a group of white officers in the Virginia situation. You had a Latino police officer, Hispanic police officer, and it still happens. So much for diversification. I mean, this is one of the things that gets pointed out routinely is that you have these situations even when you have non-white officers involved. And you've had all this left-wing mantra for years of let's diversify the police force. And it still happens even with the diverse police force. And the other one, let's defund the police. Maybe better training. You know, we need the community organizers and the social workers to go with them at every stop. Yep, that's the ticket, I'm sure. These are always terrible situations, and they're made more terrible nowadays in that everyone rushes to politicize them. Even before facts are unknown, you've got the mayor of Brooklyn Center rushing out saying the police officer should be fired. No due process for the police officer. You got the people who immediately rush out, racism. It's always racism. Even when the police involved are black, it's always racism. In Atlanta, Georgia, in the George Floyd riots, you had police officers smash the window of a car and tase the occupants who were college students because they refused to yield to the police. They refused to stop. They refused to pull over. They got stuck in a traffic jam. The police smashed the windows and tasered them to get them out of the car, to get them to stop, to get them to listen to the police officers. The police officers were black, and yet it was white supremacy and racism that the black police officers tasered the black students. It's always white supremacy. It's always racism. More often than not, there are always other factors that people don't want to talk about because they really want to scream about it. They really want the riots. Have you all seen the clip? I can't play the clip because it's expletive laden. The guy who goes up to the CNN reporter covering the riots and tells them, get out of here. You just make this matter worse. You inflame the tensions. You want the riots. They kind of do. They want the footage. They want to be on camera. I got the tear gas in me. Oh, the mean police are firing tear gas. And the people burning down the businesses. But let's also not ignore the awkward part here. Dante Wright, 20, was fatally shot during a traffic stop. Body cam footage showed 3 officers gathered near a stop car that police said was pulled over for an expired registration. Police attempted to arrest the man for an outstanding warrant. A struggle ensued, followed by the fatal shooting by a police officer who thought she was pulling her taser, but instead had pulled her gun. There was an outstanding warrant, and there was a struggle. We can be outraged at the poor training of the police officer. We can be outraged at the police officer, but let's not forget the expired tag, the outstanding warrant, and the struggle that ensued that led to the shooting.
He doesn't just have a radio show. Erick has a...
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, should you wish to be a part of this here program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You can always email me at Erick, E-R-I-C-K, at ewerickson.com. Yes, you can do that. Now, let us move on to other things. I'm just fascinated by this. Dan McLaughlin, National Review, points out that it is apparently now bad to ask if the president is in charge. John Cornyn, the senator from Texas, tweeted this out. The president is not doing cable news interviews. Tweets from his account are limited, and when they come, unimaginably conventional. The public comments are largely scripted. Biden has opted for fewer sit-down interviews with mainstream outlets and reporters. Invites the question, is he really in charge? Aaron Blake of the Washington Post, who's actually was the smart man to Chris Cillizza, the idiot. Cillizza got hired away by CNN because CNN believes that there should be more than one idiot on the payroll at their website. Aaron Blake is actually noticeably smarter than Chris Cillizza, but still falls into left-wing liberal tropes. He writes this: Cornyn's tweet builds upon a whisper campaign among conservatives that perhaps Biden isn't actually engaged in doing his job. Some have even suggested Vice President Harris is actually in charge or will be soon, a suggestion that, at worst, carries real dog whistles given her status as the first woman and a first black person to hold that job It's a baseless, ugly bit of innuendo. There is no question that the White House, just as the Biden campaign did, has motives beyond good government for keeping a lower profile and keeping Biden on script. He has, over the years, made a habit of stepping in it with his public comments. The stakes are significantly higher now that he's the leader of the free world, but there's no legitimate reason to believe he's not making all the kinds of decisions a president usually makes behind closed doors. Well, how the tables have turned. So I did not support Donald Trump in 2016. I did in 2020. And over the 4 years, as I changed, I got to know him a little better. He would call, it's so bizarre. Donald Trump would call you at home in the middle of the night, and you'd answer the phone. And normally during the day, the assistant would pick up the phone and say, is this Erick Erickson? Yes. This is, well, for a time, it was Madeline, his assistant. This is Madeline. Please hold for the President of the United States. And then he'd come on the phone. He'd call you in the middle of the night, and you'd answer the phone and say, hello. And he'd say, it's your favorite president. And, you get to talk to the guy, and what you understand about Donald Trump, contrary to what the media would constantly say, is he knew what was going on. He was making calls. Donald Trump, at the end of the day, was making the final decisions. Now, there was oftentimes squabbling, and there was oftentimes leaking, far more leaking from the Trump administration. There were battles of wills and personalities and the like, but ultimately the buck stopped with Donald Trump. He made the final call. And sometimes they didn't like it, and they would leak it and try to persuade him through the press to change his mind, but he was the one making the call. But constantly, for 4 years, the American media, is Donald Trump really in charge? Maybe it's Mike Pence. Maybe it's John. Oh, thank God John Kelly's there. He's the one making the decisions. Oh, no, it's Mick Mulvaney. That guy's a right-wing hack. He's the president now, or maybe it's Russ Vought over at OMB. He's making the call. Who is it? Somebody. You can't be Trump. Trump can't be making the calls. That was the media for 4 freaking years. And now suddenly it's not only inappropriate to ask the question of who's in charge with the geriatric drooler, but is it even racist to suggest that maybe it's someone else? I actually think Joe Biden is in charge. I actually do think that the reason Biden's staff keeps him from having press conferences and the like is not because he falls asleep at the switch. He had a big press conference a couple weeks ago. They gave him the cards and the pictures of reporters, and he asked the questions, and he gave answers. The answers were largely unscripted. He had some talking points to help him out. The man is almost 80 years old, but I do actually think he's in charge at the end of the day, that he's not actually the drooler and the vegetable that some on the right would claim. I think he actually is in charge. Sometimes the truth is actually easier than the grand, sinister conspiracy they're pulling strings. But the man, for God's sakes, he's almost 80 years old. Yes, he tires. And yes, he is notorious for putting his foot in his mouth.
30.
So absolutely, they're doing their best to keep him out of the limelight and keep him from doing interviews where he makes matters worse. Joe Biden is a professional foot swallower. But to ask the question, it was fair for 4 years with Trump. It should be fair for 4 years now. And all the media can do is scream racism and say it's inappropriate. No, it's not. Fair question. Greetings, welcome across the country. It's Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Well, you know what's racist? The new racism? Student loans. Student loans are racist. I know you didn't know yesterday. It's hard to keep up with the wokes. I mean, one day something is orthodoxy, the next day it's heresy. Yesterday it's just student loans. Student loans were bad, let's get rid of them. Today, you're racist if you don't want to get rid of the student loans. You're racist, it's bad. Racism, one of the members, what is it, Elena Presley, who also wants to defund the police, is out there saying that if you don't get rid of, you're not anti-racist if you're not anti-student loan. You know, one day, they're going to boot me off of terrestrial radio, and I'm just going to be on satellite, and that's where I can use the words that are roaming around my head right now with letters that start with, like, F. The idea that it's racist, if you think people ought to pay their debt obligations, is one of the craziest things. Now, of course, the media is going all in on this stuff now. The Democrats want to fire the head of the Congressional Budget Office because the head of the Congressional Budget Office says that if you raise the minimum wage, it'll impact the deficit negatively. And also that if you try to buy out or bail out student loans, you're going to drive up the debt in the country. Well, the media is going all in on this stuff. The Washington Post now has this, the faces of student debt. Nearly 45 million people hold $1.7 trillion in education loans. Here are some of their stories. There are parents who have traded in their financial security for their children's dreams. Husbands who have dropped out of college to care for family. Professionals who bid for parity at work has pushed retirement further out of reach. And young graduates who forego health insurance to pay down their loans. These are some of the stories of the nearly 45 million people who hold $1.7 trillion in education loans in the United States. For some, repayment of the debt is an inconvenience. For others, it's a burden. Public misconceptions about who has student loans and why simplifies what is a nuanced and complex discussion over debt relief. Among the fastest growing categories of student loan borrowers over the past 2 decades are Black students and people aged 50 and over, according to the latest Federal Reserve data. Between 2010 and 2015, the number of outstanding loans by borrowers 50 and older grew by 80%, more than 32 percentage points higher than the growth of borrowers below 50 years old, according to Federal Reserve data. The trend has continued in recent years, according to the Department of Education. In 2019, the Federal Reserve found that borrowing rates were higher in areas with a majority of Black residents. The agency noted the income disparities are likely driven by lower-income students who are more likely to need loans to pay for school. And the merits of student debt cancellation are debated, we talk to borrowers in these categories to show how debt affects people at various stages of their life. Dozens share their stories. But we narrowed the group down to a few who represent significant trends. Oh, you can bet they're the heartstring-pulling stories. Do you know what? I have student loans. In fact, I have my latest bill right here. I had to refinance my student loan. My monthly payment is $377.34. I refinanced it, actually. It originally had been a payment of about $475, and I have 13 more years to pay on it, and I've been out of law school since the year 2000. I used to have more. When my wife and I first got married 20 years ago, can you all believe that? She's put up with me that long. Got married right out of law school, 25 years old, and our student loan payments were more than our combined salaries. You know what we did? We had to go into forbearance and stop paying the loans, and the interest compounded until we made more income and we could start paying. We had to do those things. I sometimes get very frustrated because the bulk of my student loans are from law school, I did not get a scholarship to go to law school. I did very well in law school, but the law school I was going to fairly well knew it was the only one that I wanted to go to. They didn't have to offer me anything, and I was still going to go. And I pretty much floated it 100% on student loans. And I'll be paying them off, and I haven't practiced law since 2006, really. But I got a great education. I mean, the thing about law school people don't understand is that law school doesn't actually teach you the law. It retrains you how to think in a different way, and to write in different ways, to argue in different ways, and to research in different ways. You don't learn those skills in college. The bulk of your law school training, your first year in particular, is how do you research and how do you read a legal case and pick out the arguments, and then be able to reform in the same phrasing, the same way, the same style, the same pattern of arguments. How do you read a legal case and break out the rule of law, particularly in common law? It requires a more analytical thing. Between law school and seminary, my desire to read a book is basically zero between law school and seminary. And, I'm one of those people who I don't like to highlighted books. I know most people are like, oh, yeah, mark it up. I hate to deface a book. I do. It's from my upbringing, from my old librarian when I was growing up. I hate to write in a book. I got sticky notes and books, and then they fall out and messes me up. But nonetheless, I got student loans. I don't spend my time belly aching about it. It's not racist. I undertook the obligation to get my education. I will never forget. I wish I could find this article back during the Obamacare fight. There was a guy, the Washington Post, I'm almost 90% sure it was the Washington Post interviewed this guy, demanding Obamacare because he couldn't afford health insurance because he got a crappy job. And he was burdened by student loans. Do you know what the guy's degree was in? If you've listened to this program for a long time, you know what I'm about to tell you. This guy, I kid you not, he had a degree, a master's degree, a master's degree in puppetry arts. I do not know why one must get a master's degree in shoving your hand up the rectum of an inanimate object, but apparently he needed a master's degree to show how to shove your hand up the backside of a Muppet. He should work as a Walmart lobbyist and use Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas as a Muppet. Maybe he's got to pull the strings or something. I have no idea. But the guy needed universal health care for all of us because he got a freaking master's degree in puppetry arts and couldn't pay off his student loans. I'm sure his mother and father laughed him out of the house when he asked them to mortgage their house to pay for his master's in puppetry arts. Don't call me and try to defend a master's in puppetry arts. But and now the left wants you to know you're racist because of the high proportion of black students who get student loans. We're all racist if we don't want to bail out the student loans, if we don't want to get rid of them. You know the real problem here. The left in this country is fixated on getting rid of student loans. It's racist now, according to at least one member of Congress. You're not anti-racist unless you're anti-student loan. We got to bail them out. The Biden administration wants to do massive debt forgiveness. Never mind people like me who've actually busted my butt to pay back my loans. Most of them are repaid. I've got one left. I'll get nothing for the money I paid for. You had Elizabeth Warren, remember, during the campaign, was confronted by a man whose child and himself had done everything right, had worked, gotten a good job, paid off their loans. Why was their tax dollars now going to go to bail out someone who couldn't do the right thing and couldn't get a job? And you know what no one wants to talk about? Nobody wants to have this discussion. College tuition costs. Maybe it's the college tuition costs that are the real racism. I mean, young black people now from low incomes getting into colleges and colleges bleeding them for all they're worth. Maybe they should talk about that racism. You've got Harvard has a multi-billion-dollar endowment. David Hogg, the gun control activist from Florida who By the way, dude wanted to start his own My Pillow company and has bailed out. His grades are suffering. He's had to walk away after wanting a unionized American-made pillow company. Like, my bad, guys. I'm sorry. My grades are slipping. Whatever. Colleges. There's no accountability in the cost of college. There's no accountability right now for the massive spike in tuition. Tuition in college campuses around this country has gone up way more than inflation. And by the way, a lot of it is it's not like they're paying their professors anymore. They're adding on all sorts of programs and building campaigns and the like. Some of them have massive endowments. At some point, there's got to be a massive collapse in the number of colleges in this country. There are, frankly, more colleges than there are demand for colleges. And those colleges jack up their costs and their tuition, knowing that you can go get, in many cases, a subsidized student loan covered by the federal government that you do not have to pay a penny on the entire time you're there, so you have no concept of the cost of it or what you're going to be making when you get out on the other side, and then you're stuck with this massive bill. And the college then comes to you and wants money from you to perpetuate their endowment or whatnot. Colleges and universities in this country need to have a reckoning. Instead of having to talk about student loans, we need to have to talk about college salaries. Look at Rick Perry. Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, former governor of Texas, campaigned on a $10,000 a year college degree. And the university system in Texas went bat poop crazy, refused as best they could, and ultimately I think he was able to see it through and people could get a degree. And for a while there, you even had them fighting and say, well, we're just going to give you an associate degree. We're not going to give you a real degree. Real degree costs you money. But people were able to finally get a real bachelor's of art from colleges in Texas for $10,000. There's no reason that a basic college degree, college education, teaching you to think more critically, read deeper into books, and learn should cost you $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 like it does at many private many private schools, and a lot of now institutions of higher learning that are public are outrageous as well. If we're not going to have a discussion about college tuition inflation, we're not having a real discussion, because the student loan market has caused college tuition to skyrocket. In fact, the solution is not to pay off or forgive or bail out student loans. The solution is to ban student loans. Get rid of the student loan program, and you will see a remarkable collapse in college tuition in this country. Get rid of the student loan industry itself, and colleges and universities will be forced to scale back to reality. Now, they will bellyache, they will moan, they will complain. Some of them will go out of business. Good riddance. The fewer academic incubators for ignorance, the better. But we don't want to have that conversation. The Biden administration doesn't want to have it. The left doesn't want to have it. Why? Because academics are their constituent base. Essentially, the student loan industry props up an entirely large and almost universally consolidated Democratic base of votes. You keep the student loan industry going and then you bail out the students. Well, you keep the money flowing to the academic institutions that provide you a reliable pool of elite white voters for the Democratic Party. So they don't want to touch actually getting rid of student loans. They don't want to deal with college inflation. They don't want to deal with outrageous tuition. Instead, they'd have the American taxpayers bail out the people who got loans for degrees in puppetry arts and can't pay them back. Why not foster responsibility instead of fostering government bailout for people who can't pay back? Some of them are real sob stories. I get it. But you know what? There are risks in life. The government shouldn't bail you out from those risks.
Honest news and conservative views.
Don't you want to grill out this coming weekend? Where I am, the weather's going to be gorgeous. Actually, now that I look at it, no, maybe not on Saturday, but nonetheless, it should be gorgeous wherever you are at some point. And how would you like to get almost 4 pounds of free burgers? Not just any old ground chuck burger from your local grocery store. I'm talking good quality meat. You can do that at Omaha Steaks. What you do is you go to omahasteaks.com and you put Georgia in the search bar. This the name of the state, Georgia. Put it in the search bar. And you will see the Let's Go Grill package. You're going to get steak. You're going to get chicken. You're going to get pork chops. You're going to get sausage. You're going to get 4 pounds of burgers for free, just under 4 pounds. 12 5-ounce burgers, and they're great. Y'all, I have been grilling these Omaha Steak burgers. I actually order them. I'm a customer. I don't just endorse them. This is the greatest, coolest thing is I've been a customer of Omaha Steaks for years, and now I get to tell you about them and my love of them. I got a brisket from them. I didn't even know for the longest time I could get a brisket. I thought you just got like steaks and pork chops and burgers. You can get a brisket. You can get seafood. I got a brisket, and I smoked a brisket. Because why? Because I'm actually from Louisiana, not from Georgia, so I actually believe that brisket is barbecue. And, oh, man, was it good. They age their beef at least 21 days. That makes it even beefier. That brings out the real good flavor. Go to omahasteaks.com today. Put Georgia in the search bar. See the Let's Go Grill package. You'll get 12 burgers for free with this package. That's an incredible deal. You got friends. You got family. Life's going back to normal. You're taking off your mask. You're having people in your house. You want to fire up the grill. You want to have good eats. It comes with a side. It comes with dessert. Go to omahasteaks.com. Put Georgia in the search bar. You will be happy. There's a great article at Real Clear Politics by Charles Lipson today, The Great Awakening, America's Latest Religious Revival. One of the most striking features, he writes, of American history is its periodic waves of religious fervor. We're in the midst of another today, stripped of its references to God, but filled with the same passionate desire to be reborn, absolved from past sins. What sins need absolution now? America's history of slavery and Jim Crow segregation. Those original sins continue, say the movement's leaders, in a new, vaguely defined form, structural racism. Revivals like this have been called Great Awakenings since the first one in the 1740s. Today's acolytes use similar language, so this one might be called the Great Awakening, just as slavery and abolition were central to the Second Great Awakening of the 1850s, so race is central now. In both cases, the message is that white Americans must act decisively to correct historic wrongs and pay penance for them. Today's progressive politicians also offer a measure of absolution. It's a costly one, a whole series of race-based policies, massive government spending, centralized controls, and economic redistribution, plus reimagining local law enforcement. Who are the sinful whites? In practice, they are everyone except descendants of enslaved African Americans. In this reframing, Americans of Chinese, South Asian, Korean, or Cuban ancestry are all considered privileged and, in a political sense, white. It is by faith that they do this. You know, if you haven't heard my interview with Tim Keller, the theologian, I encourage you to text the word data to 33777 and listen to it. You can also get my piece on the NCAA trying to make you care with their transgender sports rules. But one of the things I was struck by with Tim Keller, he writes in his new book, and we talked about this in my interview with him, the conversation really, was how in the 60s, the civil rights movement was led by a bunch of preachers, and they were grounded in biblical language, but also hope. And nowadays, this social justice movement we're seeing now lacks hope. It lacks a hope for the future. It uses the language of Scripture without the underlying meaning of Scripture, without the underlying beliefs of Scripture. If anything, it uses the biblical language to condemn as opposed to liberate. It's not hopeful, it's pessimistic. It's divisive. In fact, Tim Keller talks about that the current secular left and Black Lives Matters movement are deeply divisive institutions seeking to divide instead of to heal and to reconcile. And you see that with this great awakening that's happening right now, where these people want to divide us as a nation, and they're more intent on breaking us up than some people who are buying secession on the right. You got the left doesn't want anyone who disagrees with them to be a part of the future of this country. Hello and welcome across the nation. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You may not know it unless you're actively engaged in conservative politics, but there's this thing in the country called the State Policy Network. And it's a group of conservative think tanks across the nation. And those think tanks, some are better than others, but they come up with essentially a lot of conservative policy ideas for state legislatures. Arguably, in my mind, the gold standard for the longest time has been the Texas Public Policy Foundation, a brilliant group of men and women who have been decisively on the cutting edge of keeping Texas the state we know and love. And in large part, that leadership was to their former leader, Brooke Rollins, who then went to work as the domestic policy advisor for President Trump and is now starting a new national organization up in Washington, D.C. And Brooke, I got to tell you to begin, Brooke, that Josh Trevino tells me I should tell you that you're the greatest thing to ever come out of the University of Texas. And I know you're an Aggie fan, and I don't want to get in trouble with you.
Oh, my goodness. I'm going to, first of all, hello, wonderful Eric. Second of all, I'm going to strangle our mutual friend, Josh Trevino, who knows that my hot button is the Aggies versus the Longhorns. For all you Texas listeners, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But I'm definitely an Aggie for the record.
All right. So I'm okay. I'm really excited for you with the American First Policy Institute. And because I've been thinking for a while, it's funny the number of conversations I've had with people on, is there a way to take what was done in the last 4 years that clearly resonated with Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters, building up this unheard of coalition on the right that we've never seen before? And is there a way to build those ideas for a greater, better American tomorrow? And it sounds like that's one of the things you're looking at doing.
Well, you couldn't be more spot on. You know, there were a lot of amazing things out of the last 4 years. The lowest unemployment rates, the lowest poverty rates, the achievement of the American dream for so many who've never had a shot before, unprecedented peace in the Middle East, bringing soldiers home, energy independence. But Eric, all of these, every single one of those issues, we who've been in the conservative movement, your listeners who've listened for a long time, we all knew this, right? We knew that the Founding Fathers' vision of less government and more freedom was not just better for a select group of people, but it was better for everyone. And the last 4 years proved that out in spades. But what was really exciting is for the first time, to your point, we started really breaking through with that message to African Americans, to Hispanic Americans, to blue collar workers that realized, again, that the other side, that the left, their radical ideas and concepts, their big government, that had done nothing but keep so many of our fellow brothers and sisters in generational poverty. And guess what? We changed it in the last 4 years. So building that out, continuing the policy concepts and ideas, fighting for freedom in this country, and taking the narrative directly to the Americans, to the hearts of the people, and making sure they know what's at stake and who's fighting for them. That is at the top of the list of what this organization is going to do.
David Shore is a Democratic pollster, definitely a progressive. He essentially got denounced, defamed, and run out of the progressive movement for pointing out last summer that the polling trends on defund the police look very bad for the left, that they did not like him saying that. And yet it turns out he was right. And he's got a lot of polling out now that shows it was Latina women in Florida, non-Cuban Latino female voters in Florida and Texas that moved towards the President Trump, in large part because of law and order, and then Black and Hispanic men moving his direction because of jobs, which seems like a no-brainer to me. But I'm really actually curious if in the past you had George Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney all kind of made arguments on those issues, and yet for some reason they believed Donald Trump and went with him. And I'm just curious as to how you see why that happened.
Well, I think that the last 4 years represented a difference in the way we talk to the American people. I'll never forget talking to Rick Santorum, interestingly enough, about the Romney race, which, if we remember, he was sort of at the edge of the stage in the first debate, and at the end it was just he and Mitt Romney. But he said he knew we were going to lose that race at the convention when Mr. Romney had, a bunch of of very similar looking people on the stage behind him, all CEOs and business owners. And what we did in the last 4 years, while our policies were good for the CEOs and the business owners, we made every speech, every event, every policy was about how does this affect the average American, the farmer, the blue collar worker, the stay-at-home mom, the hair braider, who just wants to own a salon. How do we make these policies about them? And whether it was deregulation or tax cuts or fighting for school choice, that's how we, I believed, really began to change the narrative that our side is for the everyday American, and the left and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumer's and the Joe Bidens and the Kamala Harris's, they're for the status quo. They're for the elites. They're for the Washington, D.C. power structure, and we are for America. And again, this president was unorthodox. He was unconventional. But in many ways, he was able to break through in ways that no one in our side had really been able to do before. And you saw that in those numbers you just mentioned.
Well, yeah. And let's go back to your days at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. A lot of what you guys did was really help make Texas a place to do business and attracted a lot of companies into Texas. And it was always the perception of, Republicans, these think tanks, the state policy network, they're for the rich, the CEOs, the professional corporation class. And yet underlying all of this has always been this sense of entrepreneurialism that seems now like the major corporations in the country are the new welfare class in the country, subsidized, given tax breaks, put at competitive advantages against the little entrepreneur. And Donald Trump, whatever people think of him, understood that there's this entrepreneurial spirit in America, regardless of race, and the corporations, the Fortune 500, the Republican elites and the Democratic elite don't seem to get it.
That's 100% right. And I'm glad you mentioned the Republican elites, too. I think that's an important piece here. I mean, certainly we're battling the left. We're battling a radical progressive agenda that really will destroy the country, will keep people in poverty for more generations that we may never recover. But in that, there is some complicity, if that's a word, complicity from the Aggie, but there is some complicit behavior from the sort of longtime Republican establishment as well. And I don't understand it, Eric. I can't imagine. Listen, you cannot like some of the tweeting, and I understand that. I really do. I was, part of it for 3 years. I had the front row seat. But at the end of the day, you can't disagree with the policy. And the millions of Americans, frankly, the millions of people in our world, but most importantly, Americans, who finally had a shot at the American dream due to these policies. So, the America First Policy Institute, and thank you for bringing up my Texas Public Policy Foundation. I so appreciate that. The AFPI is really in the same vein and model as the Texas Public Policy Foundation. How do we find the right solutions for Texans, for Americans, that will ultimately give them a shot, a real shot at the American dream, and do it in a way where we're reaching out to Hispanics, Black Americans, blue-collar workers, those who've never really aligned with us or haven't recently, so that they can understand it is our policies and our fight that will finally give them a shot at what this country promises.
Well, look, I'm excited for you doing it. I really am. I know there are a number of groups out there, and my concern, my fear is that there are going to be enough groups doing this that they work at cross purposes. I hope that won't happen. If I had to place bets on which groups would be dominant, anything with Brooke Rollins involved is going to be the dominant group. And I mean, honestly, I like you. I'm your friend. I'm not just saying that because you're on the phone with me. I mean, look at what TPPF has done. And so given your leadership there, I'm excited for what you're going to do, because I do think you get it. And not just because you're driving RVs to Aggie games and actually associating with actual Americans.
There is a benefit to living outside of the Beltway sometimes, although I will say all the people on our team here in Washington are such freedom fighters. But listen, I couldn't appreciate that more. And I think that you are so right, and the way you frame the conversation is so important. And let me say about you, Eric, I'm so excited for what is to come and the voice that you will continue to have and build, because I believe we will win this country back. And when people mention all the organizations that are being founded right now from former Trump administration officials, by the way, we are by far the biggest. We've got 40 staffers that have been working for a month, 2 months getting ready for the launch. former cabinet members. It will all be official in a couple of hours. You're going to love it. But ultimately, we're so outgunned by the left and by the Democrats. They have hundreds of these organizations, and we have a couple dozen. So if we can get this right and we can work together, which I know we can, and we can create a vision for this country, which I know we have and will continue to do, the sky is really the limit, and the soul of America will be saved.
Well, listen, I should probably leave it on that point, but I actually do want to ask you one more question related to that.
Sure.
That we've got an existing conservative infrastructure, much of which is maybe 40 or 50 years old. And I wonder, how do you see the injection of new blood with a lot of traditional conservative ideas that, frankly, they're still time-tested and true ideas, but not necessarily I don't want to be rude here, but some of the 40-year-old organizations that send out white papers and no longer actually rack up gains and wins and no longer talk to people outside of white paper people. How do you kind of merge this together? Is it even possible to try to build a cohesion on the right that doesn't exist right now?
Well, I believe that there is an ability to do that, and I think that at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which granted again was a much smaller world than here in Washington, but when I sort of relaunched that 18 years ago now, including my 3 years in the White House, there was just this disparate approach to working together, and we changed that in Texas, and you see the result of that, getting real policy done, changing the hearts and minds of our people. And now at the Washington level, there are some awesome organizations that today may be reevaluating, right? I mean, what the Trump 4 years proved, we completely changed conservative orthodoxy on a lot of different issues. And my goal is that there is 100% room for all of us, and that working together, we can really, really make this work. And here's the other thing that I think is exciting, Eric. One of the things that AFPI is going to be doing a little bit differently is we're really going to focus in the states as well. So it really is sort of a marriage of TPPF, the Trump presidency, and then a national new conservative organization. But the real battle, while it is in Washington, no doubt, especially with Nancy Pelosi, et cetera, but the real battle for the country is out in the states. It's in Texas, it's in Georgia, it's in Florida, it's in Pennsylvania, it's in Nevada, it's in California, it's in Oregon. And so taking these concepts and building them out, not just for a Washington-focused group, but frankly for an every state-focused group, and working alongside these organizations, there's plenty of resources in the movement. We just have to do a better job of working together. And my goal is that the America First Policy Institute can lead the way with a new approach, but that everyone will come alongside and help us for the sake of the country.
Well, look, I'm glad I asked that. That's well said, and best of luck to you. If I can ever do anything to help, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm a big fan, and I'm just excited that you're going to be leading something like this.
Oh, Eric, well, the feeling is mutual. Thank you. Thanks to all your listeners, and we will definitely stay in touch. I'd love to have a more regular voice on your show as we continue to figure this out.
Glad to have you. It's always good to talk to you, Brooke. Take care.
Thanks, Eric.
That's Brooke Rollins. She is the American First. Let me get the name right. Let me make sure. The American First Policy Institute, AFPI. Again, if you're a betting person, bet on Brooke Rollins. And yes, full disclosure, I'm a friend. Think the world of her. But the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Austin, Texas, has been a remarkable trendsetter for other think tanks, conservative think tanks around the country. The ideas they've come up with in Texas, extrapolated out to other states, modified to those state concerns, you've seen a lot of other states embrace the ideas. And remarkably, it was Brooke Rollins who took this organization that had gotten kind of sclerotic and turned it around and really helped it grow. And now around the country, there are other groups that are kind of taking what TPPF did for their states, for conservatives, and now she's going to the next level and building a national one that actually understands the idea of federalism and has to reach out to the state level. So I've got a number of friends. I know Mike Pence is involved in an organization. My dear friend Russ Vought is involved in an organization. Now Brooke Rollins is involved. Getting these groups not to work at cross purposes, but to find their specific area of engagement and work together, I think really will provide a renaissance of conservative ideas in the country at a time the Democrats are actually starting to struggle, because it's very clear that the Democratic ideas aren't resonating with the American people. It's why Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters shifted towards Donald Trump, even as white, educated white men moved to the Democratic Party. The more secular the Democratic Party gets, they drive out minority voters who are more committed, socially, conservatively, people of faith. There's an opportunity ripe for new ideas on the right, where we're not just running on zombie Reagan playbook from the 1980s. And good luck to Brooke Rollins and to all the others out there doing this. But keep your eye on American First Policy Institute. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Erick Erickson Show.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. Glad to have you with me. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Thanks again to Brooke Rollins. And again, that organization is going to be called the American First Policy Institute. They're launching today, and they're going to have some cabinet rollout, some Trump cabinet members rolling out. I'm excited by the battle of ideas shaping up on the Republican side. There just isn't really a battle of ideas on the left right now. Consider Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang he's running for mayor of New York now. He lost his presidential bid. He was a CNN contributor for a while. The guy's got a lot of money. He's been involved in tech. He came down to Georgia, said he was going to move down to help the Democrats. Now he's moved to New York. He seems listless, trying to find something in politics. He's latched onto the mayoral race in New York, and he's actually doing very well in the polling. Progressives who liked him on the campaign trail but were a little skeptical of him are coming for him with gusto now, and one of the reasons is because of street vendors. Street vendors in New York are people that they sell things on the street, they sell food on the street, they go into the subways, and a lot of them are unlicensed. And there's a licensing regime in New York City that is deep cost, a lot of burdens. And Andrew Yang has come out and said we need to crack down on the unlicensed street vendors, but we also, coupled with that, need to reform the regulations by which you get the licenses because they're so costly. Well, the left latched on to the former and ignored the latter, and they're now trying to demagogue him with Hispanic women who are the ones selling the churros and the like down in the subways without licenses, claiming he's going to shut them down, which is not really true. He wants to reform the system. So it's easier for food vendors, it's easier for food trucks, it's easier for the license. Well, also Andrew Yang is now getting attacked by the Planned Parenthood crowd. And the lesson here, by the way, Andrew Yang is pro-abortion. Andrew Yang is totally fine with you killing kids. He just says Democrats don't need to be celebrating an abortion at any point in the pregnancy. It's a turnoff to a lot of voters for Democrats to say, as the child is passed through the birth canal, it should be legal for you to crack open its head, suck out its brain, and then rip it apart as it comes out. That's what a lot of Democrats think. As long as the head is not exited the birth canal, and for some Democrats, as long as the child hasn't exited the hospital, you can still chop it into bits and let Planned Parenthood sell the pieces. And Andrew Yang just says he's pro-abortion. He just says they should be celebrating abortion at all stages of pregnancy. At some point, it's a little ghoulish. So now the Planned Parenthood activists are attacking him. The moral of the story here is Andrew Yang is not a conservative. He's actually a liberal guy. But he's just not progressive enough. They're perfectly fine to take his money, but they really don't like the idea that he may be able to be engaged. He may be able to show up and be a part of what's happening. They don't like the idea that Andrew Yang could potentially be a major candidate. And the reason is because he's progressive, but not progressive enough. For example, one of the other attacks on Andrew Yang and Erick Adams as well, who's a local government official in New York. I believe Erick Adams is involved in government in New York already. He's polling well. And Andrew Yang and Erick Adams have something in common. They're not attacking the police. In fact, you've got Bill de Blasio joining progressives and attacking the very New York Police Department he himself is in charge of. And the Democrats are beside themselves that Andrew Yang and Erick Adams in New York City have the audacity to think that we can't get rid of the police department. They have the audacity to think that maybe, just maybe, we need the police. And maybe we should allow the police to crack down on crime instead of screaming racism every time they do. It is not helping Yang and Adams with the wokes in New York City. Andrew Yang, the guy they all loved when he was campaigning for president, they now hate him because it turns out he doesn't want to get rid of the police and actually wants common sense regulation on street vendors so they're not selling you bad products in the subways without a license.
30.
You can sell bad products, you just need a license. But he wants to reform it all. He wants to lower the cost. You lower the cost, you break up monopolies that some of these people have. And they don't want that either. These people have become corporatists. The ones they warned you about voting for, that's now them. And they don't like him because he's willing to break it apart. Remarkable how the tables turn.